Do you want some advice on how to move on to the next step for your investment journey? Well, worry not, for I'm about to explain it to you. I like to define the investment journey in multiple steps. The first step I would say is basically the transition from the spending phase into the saving phase. You might be asking, well, what do I mean by this? Well, most people, when they first start out, making money, they get used to spending money, right? And this is why from age 20 or 30, the average credit card debt is usually about $3,000 to $6,000. So most people they're going to start off in debt, for the average American at least. Now, the second phase I would say is the saving phase. Most people usually don't reach this stage until they're into their 30s or late 30s, because that's when you have to start thinking about your retirement, saving up for a house, and emergency fund, other stuff like that. That's basically when you start saving more. And usually the average rate of savings from what I've seen is about anywhere from 0 to about 20%. Now, I would say a good amount to save up per paycheck is about 15 to 30%. Reason being because at this savings rate, and if you invested, let's say, into a high interest yield savings account, which today it gets you about 4.2 to 4.75% interest per year with the new Fed rate cut. You're making a decent amount of money. The next step after saving would be to try to maximize your savings. So at this step, you need to think about, well, how can I save money? And the things that I'm currently spending on money, is there alternatives that are cheaper, or is there ways in which I can find more value for my buck per se? So maybe you can buy in bulk. Maybe you need to switch to a different product that's, just a better deal. Like, let's say you're buying one pair of shoes now, but there's another pair of shoes that actually saves you money in the long term, right? And then you need to think about not being cheap, but being efficient with your money, which I mentioned in an earlier video, which you can watch below my others. The next stage I would say is simply the investing stage for beginners. So at this stage, you're basically just learning. I would recommend at this stage just investing to the NASDAQ. There's multiple ETFs that follow the NASDAQ. Just do a cheap one, and then you can just download a app like Robinhood, which is the app I use for investing into stocks, because they let you buy partial shares. So if you don't want to invest let's say over $100, something like that, you can just invest $5 just so you get used to it. You put $5 into the account, and the average return of the NASDAQ after inflation, well, before inflation is about 11%. After inflation is about 9 to 8%. Because inflation in the US is usually 2 to 3%. So you would then invest maybe, $5 a week into the NASDAQ, just so you get used to it. Because the biggest thing about growing your money when it comes to investing is really your mentality. I mean, knowledge is important, but the biggest thing is your mental state. Because look, if you're fearful when your money goes down 50%, then you're going to sell and you're going to lose money. You got to have the mindset that even if it goes down temporarily in the short term, in the days or weeks, months, or even a year, that in the long term, it's going to go up. So that's basically that's basically to train your mind. You got to train your mind before you start making more returns with money. So let's fast forward. Let's say you were doing this for about a few months, maybe even a year, right? Now you're getting comfortable with your money fluctuating up and down, which it can swing by 20% or more. So you gotta get very comfortable with that. Next stage is we're going to start increasing our investments. So at this point, you are saving about hopefully 20% of your income. And now we're going to transition. After you have an emergency set up, you want about 6 months of emergency set up. So we're going to have a full emergency fund set up. And then after that, you need to start transitioning that 20% of savings directly into the investments. So we can either go two routes. If if you're somebody who doesn't want to spend all day long looking up investments, I would not invest into individual stocks. And individual stocks is not for most people. But if you're somebody who's willing to put in the work, then I recommend it because it is proven to get higher returns if you know what you're doing. So average person, I would just say just invest into the NASDAQ. You'll be perfectly fine. It's a great investment, probably one of the greatest in the world. So you at this point, you're putting about 20% of all of your income into your investments. And this is about 8% return. So let's say we have the standard income in the US, which roughly is about 40 to 50K, right? And we're saving about 20% of this. This is going to be about 10K. A 10K with a 8% interest rate is going to be about $8,000. That's just per year, but it's exponential though. So by good 5 years, you're probably making like $15,000 from the value goes up by that much because of all the cumulative add-ins you've done to it. Now, the next stage after that, let's say you get really skilled at it, you know what you're doing, you invest in more and more. Next stage is to start borrowing against your investments. So basically, this is called asset-based debt. See, asset-based debt isn't like regular debt. With regular debt, you have a credit, right? You go to the bank and you're like, hey, look, my credit score is this. I should get a loan for this purpose, right? Asset-based debt, it isn't like that. And that's why the requirements for it are a lot more lower. Because it's basically like you go to the bank saying, hey, I want to buy a car, right? But they're like, well, you have no money. Okay, usually you get a credit loan and then that's how you usually do it. But if you want lower interest rates and a better deal, you're going to want to get an asset-based loan. So your home, let's say, for example, you say, hey, bank, I want money. I don't have money, but I do have a home that's worth 500K. What if I put that as collateral so if I ever need to pay off the loan, you can just take the home? Now, this home is worth 500K. And the value of the car, let's say it's worth 15K. Now, asset-based loans, they only take the collateral if it falls for a market below a certain market value. So usually this percentage is going to be 25%. And what we call this in stocks is a margin call. What you would call it in real estate, I'm not so sure, but it's basically the same concept where if the value of the asset that you are holding as collateral falls below within a certain ratio of how much debt you have, then they take it. And usually that's about 25 to 30%. But again, the house is worth like 500,000 and the actual car is worth 15,000, meaning that the house would have to drop in value to a point where that 15,000 would be more than 75% of your whole net worth. And if we just do the math real quick, the house would have to drop to somewhere about like $45,000. And a house isn't going to drop like 99% in value. It's just not going to happen. We have never had a crash anywhere in US history where a house has crashed that much, like overall in the market. It just doesn't happen. Now, housing crashes can happen by like 50, 60%. They're extremely rare, almost never happen, but they can happen. But you're not going to get a 99.999% crash. So it's a pretty safe to do that. And here's the good thing about asset-based debt. Usually with these type of loans, you can get anywhere from 4, depending on your net worth, all the way to 6% interest rate. But with regular credit, you get anywhere from 7 to 30% interest. And with credit cards, it's even worse. Credit cards, you can go from 25 all the way up, I believe, to like 35% interest rate on a credit card. So this is the good thing about asset-based debt. Your loans are a lot less. And basically, the final stage of investing is what we in investment world like to call buy, borrow, and die. Basically, we want to avoid taxes. So what we do to avoid taxes is basically we borrow against our investments so we don't ever have to sell. So let's say if I ever want to buy something, I don't ever sell something in order to get that thing. I borrow against it, right? I take on debt at a low interest rate of about 4 to 6%. I didn't get great returns. The average market return, again, 8%. So if you simply just do the math, 8 minus 6 is 2. That's 2% more returns just doing basic math right here. And then I can do a write-off with the debt too. So basically the government's going to give me money. So for every $10,000 you write off, you get off $3,000 in income. So I'm going to save money in taxes. I'm going to get lower interest rates. I'm going to get higher returns, and I'm going to be able to keep the previous assets I have. And those assets that I held collateral, they will continue making gains if they're good assets. So not only am I going to have a new asset, but my old asset is going to continue making money. I'm going to have write-offs, and I'm not going to pay taxes because no assets were sold. So instead of being taxed at 30 to 45% of the income of the asset, I'm getting taxed 0%. The only thing I have to pay is about 4 to 6%. And 4 to 6% interest rate is a lot less than 30% tax. And that is basically the steps to the financial world.